All right. Anybody have any questions about any of that business? Anybody have any questions about the final papers? Sorry, the final drafts of your first papers. Excuse me. Don't have a freak out. Don't freak out more than you already are. No questions. All good. How's it going, everybody? Semester's getting busy, huh? We holding up? Yeah.
I'm trying to hang in there.
Listen, I want to do what I can to help you. Okay, so reach out if you need any help or if you want to talk about anything. Even though I'm not an artist, I know that it is stressful for you all, and I have some experience at Micah. And I'm always willing to help where I can with this class. Okay, so just let me know what I can do. All right. Good. So, how'd it go? I hear you guys had some conversations about the forum. We discussed last week the controversial forum. How did those conversations go? Did you guys have to? What happened? Were these required?
They were optional, so I have no idea what happened.
Okay. Did anybody attend any of these conversations? Too busy.
Just the second one, the one on Monday afternoon. There was like some guy there named Mark, and he was like an unbearable centrist. Yeah, that's just my opinion, though. He was a bit, I don't know how to say it.
Corporate.
Yeah, he had that rampant white guy who never had an encounter with a cop energy.
I might give off that energy. Although I did have an encounter when I was 21. But anyway, was this required? Wait, did you guys have forum on Monday? But forum is not required. Is forum required?
Yeah.
It is. And Elva, if I understand, this was not your forum speaker. This was an additional event. Is that correct?
Yeah, it took place after forum at 2 p.m.
Okay. All right. Anybody else attend that? No. Okay, just curious. So let's talk a little bit about a couple things. I'm going to talk a little bit about what we discussed last week and reorient us and get us into our reading for today. Last week we were talking about two things in particular that come out of the Michael Pollan reading. One of the topics that we were talking about, I had given the term frontier values. The title of this class is The Wild, and we're discussing various approaches to understanding the wild, various depictions of the wild, and of course various critiques of the wild. Trying to come to understanding of what this term means. It is a value-laden term, and it betrays a heritage. And in many cases, it betrays a heritage that is not very favorable. This idea of the wild is also under fire for another reason, as we will see in coming weeks. There is a very lively debate among conservationists and biologists about how helpful this term is. And this speaks to a raging debate about the nature and the prospects of conservation. What does conservation look like in a planet of 7 billion people, which we call the Anthropocene? This age is the Anthropocene. It's called the Anthropocene because this is an age where humans have left their mark everywhere. I'll talk more about this next. Well, I guess the week when we start talking about Edward Wilson, but Anthropocene. I don't know if you guys have seen that term. I put it in the chat. You have these various terms in paleontology. The study of the history of, uh, of life on Earth, and you have certain periods. The period when the dinosaurs thrived is given a certain name, and various other when the mammals first emerge. And this period is now called by biologists the Anthropocene. Anthropo in Greek means man. So this is the age when of human dominance. And to put it a different way is to put it like this, that there is no single place on earth anymore that can escape evidence of human influence and behavior. Even on the most remote peak of the Andes, you will find high carbon dioxide levels. In the Antarctic, we see melting glaciers. There is no place on Earth that is quote unquote pristine. And so the lively debate is about whether we should or whether we can, how practical is it to try and, to conserve? What is the prospect? What is the future of conservation? This is linked up with a very interesting discussion about what our images of conservation were earlier. Or I should put it this way. This is linked up with a conversation about how we viewed sustainable human communities in the past, in particular the Native American community. For many decades and centuries, biologists in this country had, we now know, incorrect understanding of how Native Americans lived and interacted with with this environment. And what is becoming clearer now is a much more nuanced picture, much more complicated picture about how Native Americans lived on this land. In short, in some, there are doubts about how pristine a sustainable lifestyle has been. So those are the discussions we're going to be getting into as we move forward. I'm very interested in taking these discussions to a very practical end, talking about, climate change and what is, the future of sustainable life, where we can live in harmony with the natural world. And, right now we're at 7 billion people. Scientists believe that the human population is going to top out at 9 billion. That's a lot of people on this planet. How is this planet going to host us all? And at the same time, how are we able to slow the extinction of species? Some biologists call this the fifth great extinction. Humans are responsible for this great extinction of species. And that's a topic that we'll take up with Edward Wilson. Back to frontier values, the way we view the wild, and if we treat the wild, and if we treat nature around us in a manner that is not sustainable, this is, of course, rooted in our values. This is rooted in how we view our environment, how we value it, what we think that environment is there for. Is it there for us to use, to consume? Is it there for our pleasure? The Europeans, when they arrived on this country, in America, in this continent, as Michael Pollan depicts it, they viewed this as a very hostile environment. He talks a little bit about the theology of this. For the Puritans and the Pilgrims who arrived in New England, this was a land of, this was a land that was a mystery, and it was frightening to them, quite frankly. And it was harsh. Anybody who's ever lived in New England, those winters are really, really harsh. I went to school in Boston. I love Boston. I fucking hate that winter. And so I can't imagine, the Puritans coming from England, which is very temperate. They don't really have much of winter. They arrive in New England and suddenly it's like 90 degrees in the summer and humid and then frigid in winter. They must have been like, what is going on here? And of course they made quick enemies of the Native Americans. So they ensured that they were not secure politically as well. The Europeans viewed this land as something to be conquered, as something to be made familiar, as something to be put underfoot and radically transformed and made less alien and made hospitable. And that's how Michael Pollan describes the impact of Johnny Appleseed. He was bringing with him the most familiar fruits, right? The apple. Of course, to our eyes, it's alien, it's familiar, but with a little bit of prodding, he points out that this guy was a little bit messed up and he was doing something kind of funky. And right, but wrapped up in this traditional story of Johnny Appleseed, the lie, that is, of Johnny Appleseed, as well as these other stories we were talking about last week, you get these Felix, you need to go live in New England for a little while. You might reassess.
I mean, I live in West Virginia and it gets pretty cold here. Like, there was one time when it got down to like 4 degrees and I loved it. So I'm fine with the cold.
No, when you live in Maine, it's actually the worst. Like, they probably have nice weather for 2 months out of the year, and then everything else is like so icy. It was a really tough winter.
It's that wind. That wind, I can still feel it piercing me. The other problem I have with the winter in New England is a tangent. I retract my statement.
Yeah, no, winter is still going to be my favorite season.
Okay, well, hang on, I'm not quite done. The other problem with winter in New England is the snow stays on the ground all winter. I've never seen that. In Baltimore, it melts, right? And then you get another snow and it's pretty, and then it melts, and then another snow, it's pretty. Boston, the snow stays on the street and it becomes like nasty gray and black, and you have piles of it in the wind. And but I do love New England, Felix. I would strongly urge you get up there at some point. It's one of my favorite parts of the country. But anyway, life, for the early, for reasons of their own making, of course, the settlers, the European colonists, found life here very difficult. The Native Americans, there's many stories where the Native Americans reach out a hand to teach them, to instruct them on how to live sustainably, how to make it in this environment. And in many cases, the Europeans simply took what was given them and crushed the Native Americans. So, they made their lot more difficult. But these frontier values endure. The experience of the frontier in America endures across the country. It's hard to be an American, not get caught up in these values, no matter what your race or background. These values we were talking about, we were talking about individualism, right? That's the big frontier value, right? I don't think there's any country on earth that has our degree of individualism. And I was trying to feel out here if you had any ideas about, where that individualism pops up. I think it pops up in a variety of places in our society. I was arguing that guns is one big way that, that's our more obvious frontier value that still endures. But, this being a dog-eat-dog society, the notion that you pull yourself up by your bootstraps, these are all part of the myth of individualism, right? That this myth that, like Johnny Appleseed or Davy Crockett, the American heritage is to stride out into the wilds and manage and make it and wrestle nature, The other thing we were talking about, and this is pointing now towards the direction of the reading guide for today, we were talking about also Pollen's critique of what's happened to the apple. You know, it sounds simplistic on one hand, but it's very profound on the other. What we've seen is a great impoverishment or diminishment of the species. Where once there, you know, the apple has the potential for immense biological diversity. And through human influence, we have winnowed it down to just a couple species, you know, Red Delicious, Jonathan, Granny Smith. And why? On the basis of taste, but also our commodity economy, right? You know, I don't know if you guys ever heard the myth that a Twinkie, you guys know, we all know Twinkies, right? A Twinkie supposedly can live on a store shelf for, I don't know, a couple years, 10 years. You open that package, it's as fresh as the day that it was, I don't know, manufactured, produced, right? Way longer than it should. Twinkies don't go moldy. That's a problem, people. The Red Delicious apple displays similar properties. I guess what I'm trying to say is that, you know, the apple species that ended up, the winners, if you will, the winning apples, the apples that won out, were not only the ones that meet our taste, they're also the ones that suit this economy, right? They're the apples that can look pretty, because the consumers don't happily put up with, you know, faults or blemishes or bruises. My kids are such snobs. They get a bruised apple, they're like, ew, and I have to eat all the bruised apples. I could smack them. The market economy rewards those fruits and vegetables that can travel long distances, that can sit on the shelf for a long time, and sell. But you pay a price for this, right? This is apple picking season. How opportune. Is anybody going to go apple picking this weekend? No, I don't see anybody. Bad idea.
Oh.
Huh?
Never mind.
What?
I said I wish, because I like apple
Ooh,
picking.
you should wish. Guys, apple picking is marvelous, especially in the fall. You know, that weather, it's a little nippy. You put on your sweater, you get your pumpkin fucking latte, right? You get out there, you get yourself a barrel. Have you all had apples you pick right off the tree? Have you? Have you seriously had an apple right off the goddamn tree? Really? Some of you are shaking your head. That is immoral and unacceptable. You must go. Get out there. There is, if it wasn't COVID time, Alina, there's no COVID in the orchard. Get out there. Come on. Naima. Wait, Mackenzie. Wait, who had tomatoes off the plant? Elva. Elva, I would have talked to you. What are tomatoes off the plant like?
There's like we grow them in like a community garden, and they're like the best tomatoes you've ever had in your goddamn life, right? They're not as red as the ones you find in the store, but they're so fucking good. They're so good.
We actually have tomatoes growing in our backyard right now, and like cucumbers and jalapenos, I think, and a few other like vegetables. And
Yes, us too.
Yeah, my my stepmom makes like she makes her own pasta, like her own shells, and she makes her own like tomato sauce with it out of the tomatoes that we have. And it's like so good.
Dude,
It beats store-bought food
you will
any
not
day.
get that food at Micah. What are you doing?
I know.
Can you bring your grandma to campus?
Well, that was my stepmom, but
Oh, your stepmom. Yeah, bring your stepmom to campus.
I could bring her with
Ava,
me.
Ava, who do you want to extrapolate, Ava?
I just wanted to know why Alina said, like, I don't know how you can tell if you're allergic to apples. I mean, I guess you can. I just wanted more on that
Someone said
point.
you were allergic to apples? Oh,
Okay, so I can eat like cooked apples. I can have apple pie and all that kind of stuff. I think it's the peel. Because like I'm Jewish, so I eat them at Rosh Hashanah because there's like honey on them, and I'm usually okay. But if I eat more than like a slice, it makes like my mouth and throat really itchy.
Yeah, my step does the same way. Like he can eat apple pie and stuff like that. It's like chemicals or some sort of something in the apple skin that makes your mouth and throat itch really bad.
Yeah, and it happens with apples. It happens with like plums and like all that kind of stuff, like peaches and all that. I can have them if they're cooked.
Stone fruits.
I never heard of that before. I'm sorry to hear that. That's a shame.
Me too.
As someone indicated here, Naima is right. Naima, wait, you're the city boy, right? Green ones off the tree are the best. They are. My dad has a little apple tree planted a few years ago, and these apples popped out for the first time this year. They are ugly. Ugly. And I took a bite of one. I was like, fuck it, I'll try it. It was unbelievable. You will not find a store-bought apple that tastes like that. But let's talk about tomatoes, everybody, because I am very fond of tomatoes. Tomatoes are special. Tomatoes, you buy them in January, they're not the same, right? Let's talk about this. You got yourself a summer tomato, you picked it off the vine, or you get it at a farmer's market versus a tomato you get, okay, let's splurge, Whole Foods, greenhouse tomato. It will not be the same. Do you guys know why? There's something special about industrial tomatoes that can never measure up. Think about the consumer. Think about the picky consumer. What is the picky consumer looking for when the picky consumer is producing tomatoes? Nobody's walking with me here?
No bruises.
No bruises! Elvis says sexy? What? Did you mean that? What Elva was supposed to answer, or Felix with their tomato garden, is you go pick a tomato off your own tree in redness, sure. In summer, it's soft and mushy and like juicy and oozing all kinds of yummy goodness. But that's a problem for the capitalist market, y'all. You feel me? Surface tension, right? What's the problem? You can't ship it. You can't ship a tomato at peak ripeness. So does anybody know what they do industrially when these industrial grown tomatoes, how they make sure these make it to market? Does anybody know what they do? They pick them green. They pick them green always, and they ripen them with ether gas. And so they will never, ever have the same texture as when you grow them yourself. And, you know, all our plants and vegetables, you know, I mean, you guys know where they come from? Where do most apples come from in America? Why don't we start with that? I think you guys know this answer. Where do the apples come from? Russia. No. Oh, right. Originally, they come from Kazakhstan. I meant the ones you buy in the store. Sorry, I apologize. The ones you buy in the store, where do they come from in America? What state grows them the most? No? Oh, dudes, come on now. All right, okay, never mind. I retract. I'll give you a softball. Here you go, softball. Where do the potatoes come from? Idaho. Look at that. Where do the avocados come from? There's an ad, right? Avocados from Mexico. No, you don't hear that one? Avocados from Mexico. Or they come from California. Seriously, you guys don't know where the apples come from in this country? The biggest apple growing region in the country. Washington State.
I did not expect Washington State.
Yeah. Here's a fun fact. It's also, Washington State is also the biggest grower of hops. What are hops? What are hops?
Used in beer.
Used in beer. When you're 21, that will be very important, but not now. Don't you dare. But apples are very, anybody know the most fertile vegetable growing region in the country? You guys know where your almonds come from? It's called the Central Valley of California. The Central Valley runs from Bakersfield in the south to Fresno in the north. And it is the optimal growing region in the country. Why? Well, it doesn't get too hot, doesn't get too cold. The soil is historically very fertile. The problem is that it has been, we don't have anybody from California here, do we? I don't know if you've heard in the news lately, California's got some problems. I love California. I love going out there, but what are their problems, everybody? What do they got? They have a couple environmental problems.
They're on fire.
They're on fire. That's a big problem. It's not easy to grow avocados or almonds when you're on fire. Other more long-standing problem in California, what is it?
Still going through a drought.
They've been going through a drought. They've been going through a drought for a very long time. So it's there's challenges to growing vegetables out there and fruits. More recently, they've had labor problems because a lot of the vegetable and fruit pickers come from Mexico. And of course, President Trump has been very hard on that immigrant working population. And in the last 2 decades, they've had the bee population has crashed. And so they have to truck in bees for pollination. So the Central Valley, is where somewhere between 40 and 60% of our fruits and vegetables come from in this country, right? And by the way, that would include lettuce, that would include broccoli, that would include carrots, celery, right? Do you guys pay attention to where the fruits and vegetables come from when you go to the grocery store? Do you ever take a glance? Do you ever take a look?
Not really.
You really should. I'm a gardener, so I am curious, but I also, been teaching classes on globalization and environmental ethics. So I'm always interested to see where they come from. In the winter, it's interesting to see where our fruits and vegetables come from. Well, here's a quick way to get at this issue I'm talking about from a totally different vantage point. Totally different. What fruits and vegetables are in season right now?
Pumpkins and squash.
Onions? Or is that a little later?
I don't know. You stumped me. Apples. Let me try this a different way. When in America, does anybody know when strawberries are in season?
Yeah, I want to say summer.
Summer. Who the hell said summer? Naima, come on, man. I need a little more specific than that.
I think like early summer.
Yeah,
Like June-ish.
June. Anybody know when peaches are in season?
Is that more like July, or am I making this up?
It's a little bit of a trick question because it can vary. In Maryland, the peaches are like July, but then in the South, they're in. Oh, wait a minute. Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe we're August and they're July. How about asparagus? No one's going to get this one. I know. Naima's like, what the fuck? Why you asking me this? I think go to art school, we ask when asparagus is in season. Asparagus is in season in May. So in the winter, where does our asparagus come from? It comes from Peru, actually. I look. I take notes like Robin Kimmerer walking down the aisles. I'm taking notes, paying attention. I want to know. A lot of our apples come from New Zealand. Flowers, increasingly they come from Kenya. Pineapples, you all know that one, right? Where are they coming from? Wait, Mackenzie, you nodded vigorously.
I did. I don't know where they come specifically, but I know it's in tropical countries.
Well, once I'll make this America centric. What state do they come from typically? Really?
Florida? I don't know.
No idea.
I don't eat pineapple.
Tropical. They come from Hawaii.
Oh,
Oh,
that actually does make sense. Never
it
mind.
makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
I don't eat pineapple, so I don't know. I like never look at their labels.
In a lot of ways, you know, Hawaii and pineapple are kind of synonymous, but there's a very curious irony there. As we'll see when we get to Emma Maris's book at the end of the class, even though pineapples are known to be like Hawaiian fruit, they're not indigenous to Hawaii. They were introduced. Florida, we didn't talk about Florida much. What do we get from Florida, everybody?
Oranges.
When are oranges in season?
Late spring.
All the time, Naima? Are you serious? Now, like late fall, that's why we get them in the winter. What's in season right now? Well, I can tell you what I'm getting in my garden. I'm picking some beans. I got some butternut squash, kale. My raspberries are still banging. Very happy. Still getting a couple tomatoes, but this will start to fade away. Why am I raising all this? Well, as Kimmerer points out, I think we are not plugged in to the seasons. We're not plugged in to the harvest, right? It would have been very different 100 years ago. I mean, guys, I'm I'm older than you all by like a generation. I don't really feel that much older, but I can still remember going to grocery stores when I was a kid, and you didn't see asparagus from Peru. That was not a thing, and I didn't see apples from New Zealand, This in my lifetime, I see that, thanks to globalization. Previous generations, in other words, they had little choice but to live seasonally. And if you didn't live seasonally, how'd you get your fruits and vegetables in the winter, everybody? Before the age of globalization. Anybody know?
Wouldn't you just like plant enough for you to last winter and hope to God that like nothing happened to the plants that you were stocking up and stuff?
Not exactly. Well, let me give you an example time. We were talking about tomatoes a minute ago. Tomatoes, they're kind of delicate. They're just not going to make it. And by the way, when it gets below freezing, there's no way. Raspberries, same thing. They just don't last. Elva says, ferment it. You could. You don't have to. Pickle everything. I don't know, Elva. I love pickles, but you're not going to pickle strawberries, are you, Elva? I mean, you probably could. What do you do with your fruit, everybody? Hello? Jam. Ava knows. Jam or jelly. What's the difference? Let me know what the difference between jam and jelly is. Again, you did not think you would be talking about this in art school, but it is important. Maybe fruit chunks. Jam has the seeds. Jelly does not. And jelly is held together with pectin. Okay, anyway, these are all my worries. But someone mentioned a freezer. You know, going back a couple generations, that was not an option either, right? So how did families make it through the winter? So my dad lives up on a farm in Pennsylvania, just across the board here, about 40 minutes. And the farmhouses up there, this was a part of the country that was settled by Germans. And when they built these farmhouses, they always built them with a couple things in mind. What do you think they were looking for when they built a farmhouse? They wanted to build it next to what? Yep.
Somewhere where like the soil is good.
Yes, of course. But if you're going to situate it on the farm, what you're going to put next to, you're going to put it next to water. Specifically, you're going to put it next to a spring. Do you guys know what a spring is? What's a spring? A spring. What's a spring? Hello?
You got like fresh water?
Yeah. Can't just be any old water. You need fresh water.
Best.
I'm sorry?
Has to be the best.
Has to be the best. And then the Germans would put their farmhouses on the hill. And they would put their farmhouse on the hill so that the basement would back into the ground. And they would do this so they could dig out a cellar. And sometimes they called this a root cellar. And anybody know why they called it a root cellar?
Because it was underground. There were roots of trees and shit down there.
Dude, well, no. I mean, there might have been roots down there, but you were keeping roots in there. Carrots. Carrots keep all winter. Do your parents have a bag of carrots that have been sitting in the fridge for 6 months? That is likely because carrots keep for a very long time. Other roots that keep a very long time, potatoes. So these root cellars were a place where you could keep your food that would last over a very long period of time, through the winter, ideally. And these old German farmhouses also have, I was in one a few years ago, and when you went down there were all these shelves, and they were still full. The farmer's wife had just died, and they were full of preserves. You would have a vegetable garden, and you would spend the last few weeks of the garden canning tomatoes, squash, beans. In many cases, you would pickle them because pickling is a sure way to keep them fresh and unspoiled for a long period of time. I shouldn't say fresh, but at least unspoiled. It's a way of preserving. Pickling is a form of preserving food, right? And sauerkraut is a form of pickling. And I remember, Apples, they also keep a very long time. And I remember the strangest thing I ever saw in one of these farmhouses I never expected to see. It was, if I were in class, I could draw it for you. One of the shelves had these little holes in it at like 4 inches apart. And there was like a little vase under each one. And I said to the farmer, what is that for? And he said, we pick our grapevines and we stick the grapevines in the water and they keep for months. I thought that was pretty far out. So someone says earlier here, Felix, there's something to be admired about living seasonally. I think it makes you appreciate the foods you eat more. That's certainly Kimmerer's point. Why is that? Anybody want to expand on that?
I mean, like Kimmer's whole like, I don't like. Is it from like a whole book or something, or like what are these passages from? Like,
I was just glomming onto your point here, Felix. And like,
yeah, but just like yeah, all of those like passages talk about like the importance of like appreciating what the earth gives you and giving back to it, and like take only what you can give, and like that whole thing that we had to write about, but also like not just that, but like take like don't take what's not even there, like I don't want to go out of my way to get food from a completely different country or across the like across our country just because I want it. Like I would rather have something that's local, because not only do I appreciate it more because it's like more personal because it's where you're from, but it's fresher too. It'll taste better because you think it does and because it is. And I will always prefer like the tomatoes in my garden and the apples in my grandmother's like backyard to anything else.
I've always been a big proponent of people growing their own food.
Yeah, it sucks that not everyone can do it though. I really wish that like in cities there are more community gardens.
You'd be surprised. You'd be very surprised what you can do. So in the 1940s, well, actually, before I jump into that, let's be very clear about something we discussed a minute ago. Apples from New Zealand, asparagus from Peru, oranges from Florida. What's the problem with all this? There's a problem. What is it?
It takes time for shipping.
It takes time for shipping. What else? If they are not shipped, how do they get to us quickly? How else do these fruits and vegetables make it to our local supermarket? Hello? Has anybody ever traveled before? I know you have. How can avocados make it to Baltimore?
Preservatives.
Well, maybe along the way. I was thinking more in terms of transport.
Oh, boats.
Well, we got boats. Ruby mentions them. Truck. Plane.
Yeah, truck and trains if it's not like across large bodies of water.
So, dude, get this. Your asparagus is being flown to your plate. Your apples are being flown from New Zealand. This is not sustainable, everybody. Why not? What is our concern?
It's like kind of like a waste of resources. It takes up a lot of, fuel, and it's released into the air.
Absolutely.
And what's the point if they're not going to be fresh?
Right. The carbon footprint of this kind of trade that we're talking about is absolutely insane. We can talk, let's just talk in terms of petroleum. Vandana Shiva, who is an agricultural activist that I like very much, she says that our agricultural system is dripping in oil. And oil is the biggest, carbon, fuel combustion is the biggest source currently of carbon emissions. The agricultural sector is a huge culprit in this regard. Where is agriculture dripping in oil? Well, we got one here. We got the transport. The transport of these products from Idaho, from California, from New Zealand. That takes oil. Oil is literally burned to get them here. Where else is oil involved in farming? Who knows? What all goes into, let's talk about production. Well, what all goes into industrial? If you're going to distinguish between organic farming and industrial farming, what are the different distinguishing features, everybody?
A lot of stuff is automated instead of like hand-picked, for example.
It is automated as opposed to hand-picked. What else? What else distinguishes organic production from industrial production or conventional production?
Pesticides?
Absolutely. What else?
Genetic modification. But they kind of like do like breeding. It's debatable.
Yeah, because there is some, that's not taken to be a distinguishing feature of organic production, right? There's some who argue you can grow GMO products organically. Organically has to do with something else. Organically has to do with the input or what you refrain from putting into the plants and the soil. What do you want to put into that soil to make sure that these things grow? Come on, city people, give it to me. Fertilizer. Exactly. This is the most significant distinguishing feature between organic and conventional agriculture. I promised you we were going to talk about the Amish today. I will not disappoint. We will talk about the Amish today. Ava's excited. So here's your weekend field trip, everybody. Amish and apples, preferably together. Find it, figure it out. It's doable. The Amish do not use chemical fertilizer. They're old school German farmers. They preserve everything too. What do they use? No chemical fertilizers. What do they use, y'all? They use their pee. Elva, you funny. They might. They will use dung, animal dung. That's a more reliable source. In the middle of the previous century, well, I'm going to take you way back. Let's go way back. Let's go way back to a guy by the name of David Ricardo. David Ricardo, he was an economist. He wrote a book in the early 1800s in England, and he had a very dire prediction. He predicted that the human population was going to outstrip the ability of this earth to feed them. And he predicted that there would be a crash. Now, that was kind of cute and quaint and funny because he wrote this in the early 1800s. What was the population of the earth at that time? I don't know. You guys understand how the growth of the earth, how the population was growing? It's an exponential curve. We're at 7 billion now. We were at 6 billion 10 years ago. We were at 5 billion 15 years ago, right? Alina, did you look that up? Because I suspect it was a lot less. I would.
No, I was just saying like 2.5 people.
2.5 people. No, more than that. But I would guess that in the early 1800s, you're talking about maybe a billion. And look where we are, right? So he saw an exponential curve coming to growth. And he's like, oh, geez, we are not going to be able to have enough resources on this planet to feed us. That was proven wrong. We have more food than we know what to do with. Why? Something called the Green Revolution. Does anybody know what the Green Revolution is?
I vaguely remember this from like sophomore year of high school.
What do you remember
about it? It was like a push towards farming and like scientific innovation within farming. That's what I vaguely remember.
Basically, what the Green Revolution did is that it came up with chemical means of greatly increasing the productivity of soil. So where you could only grow 10 bushels of corn on an acre, suddenly you were able to grow 40. And one of the ways that the Green Revolution did this, well, through increased pesticides, killed pests. You also have herbicides, which killed weeds. But most importantly, they figured out how to create synthetic fertilizer. And what synthetic fertilizer does, I just put this in the chat, it fixes nitrogen in the soil. Nitrogen is the most important chemical that a plant gets in the soil that it needs. There are a couple plants that put this in the soil for other plants. I described to you last week how the Native Americans employed a method that we call now the Three Sisters. These three sisters being corn, squash, beans grown together, polyculture, right? The corn provides a stalk for the bean to grow up at. The squash growing around the base provides shade to retain water. The bean fixes nitrogen in the soil. Turns out beans are a natural fertilizer. Animal dung can only do so much. Animal dung is a great fertilizer, but it quite simply it cannot compete with chemical fertilizers. It just can't. However, the scientists, and I forget the names, they were two German guys, middle of the century, previous century, who came up with the process to create, artificial fertilizer. If you want to industrially produce nitrogen, you must create huge amounts of heat. And the only way to create those huge amounts of heat is through burning oil. So where is our agricultural dripping in oil? The transport of products, industrial fertilizer. And that industrial fertilizer leaves compost. Good idea. Also takes a long time, right? This is where the issue of consumption comes up, right? Because it's all premised, as Kimmerer points out, it's all premised on the question of how much do you need to get out of that acre of land? You know what I mean? Compost and dung, they can take you a certain way. But they will not deliver you the 7-Eleven variety of abundance. So let's talk about the Amish. This is probably as good a time as any. And I'll make clear their relevance as we move along here. So what did we say about the Amish last week? The Amish, for those of you who are not familiar with them, they are a very unique community of people. Their older homeland in the United States is in a place called Lancaster County, PA, which sits about an hour west of Philadelphia and an hour north of Baltimore. They came from Switzerland largely in the 1700s. They were they were like the Puritans. They were religious, refugees. Believe in theological circles, we refer to their religion as Anabaptism. They were Anabaptists. They come to Lancaster, and they set up shop here. So, what do you all know about the Amish? And I forget where the name Amish comes from. God damn it! Should look that up. So, what do you all know about the Amish? How they live? If you were Amish, what would you be doing right now?
Farming, probably.
You would not be on Zoom. You would be churning butter. You would be growing that beard. Well, if you're a man. I couldn't be Amish. I can't really grow a beard.
Me neither.
There you go. Felix, fist bump.
Yeah.
What else do you know about the Amish?
I believe they grow their own produce. Produce, but like when it comes to meat and everything too, because here in Maryland there's a farmers market out Timonium.
Yeah.
And I typically, well, my mom and I, we usually go like every Saturday because that's when they set up Friday to Sunday. And everything that's there is grown or produced by the Amish. So every meat that they sell, every whatever drinks they have, whatever produce they have, it's all grown by them.
Good. Yeah, whenever you make it to Baltimore, go to that Amish market Kendall's talking about, just north of the city. I believe you can get there from light rail, a little bit of a hike, but they make amazing donuts. And I don't even like donuts. I don't know what they're doing to those donuts.
Oh, yeah. that donuts, I always get like a dozen of them.
Absolutely. And then eat them in the parking lot. And you will see the Amish when you arrive. They stand out front. They have their black wide brim hats and their beard and their suspenders. And the women they tend to wear long dresses and headsets. It's a little bit of a surreal sight in the middle of Baltimore. By the way, the biggest community is no longer Lancaster. The biggest community is now in Ohio because Amish have 12 kids. And it makes it very hard to keep them all on the farm or get them all into a farming lifestyle when you have 12 kids. They run out of land in Lancaster, basically, is the problem. So they have to head out there. The Amish also, it turns out, from an economic standpoint, they are the only, I don't know if you guys know this, that farmers are having a very hard time. Farming is a very difficult business. The Amish, guess what? They are the only farmers who are not in debt. They're the only farmers who are making it. Why? What do you guys know about their farming practices? I guess we kind of skipped over this premise. They have rejected modern technology. Do we need to dwell on that more?
I'm assuming that they're not buying or selling outside of their communities. So they're just buying up, or are they even buying a property? I don't even know. But they're just selling and throwing shit around within their own little places.
The Amish are actually filthy rich, but not individually. They're communally rich. They're more than able to buy up farms. So my dad has a farm just outside Lancaster, and the Amish are moving in, and they're buying farms all over because the traditional farmers, they can't make it anymore, but the Amish can. And it's very interesting dynamic. The traditional farmers really resent them. They really dislike them. So the Amish, they've rejected modern technology. They are utterly self-sufficient. This means they are not using fertilizers, industrial, I should say. If they are have rejected modern technology, they don't use tractors. How do they plow the land?
Like ox? I don't know.
You're right. Horses, oxen, donkeys. It's a completely different scale. It's a small scale. They do have these markets once in a while, which is great because they have good stuff. But they're not making stuff exclusively or even mostly for a commodity market. Unlike the vast majority of farmers in this country that are. The Amish practice polyculture. And if you are not using industrial means of agriculture, if you're not using industrial fertilizer and pesticide and herbicide, you have to be more sensitive to the demands and the needs of the land itself. You are, in other words, as Kimmerer would put it, you are forced to farm sustainably. And the Amish are. So who is ready to go live like the Amish? Or what is your greatest reservation? Mine, I already told you, it's the beard. I just can't. Everything else sounds great. Anybody else have some reservations about joining the Amish?
It's the religion for me.
Okay.
It's really like
I didn't even think
restrictive.
about that.
Oh yeah, me too. Me and Ava. Yeah. Yeah, I can't really like start a family like physically, so.
Okay, so guys, if you were to find a sect of Amish that were gay or gay friendly, would that how about then?
It's still a no for me because of the modern medicine. kind of enjoy that.
Kind of wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for modern medicine, so.
I don't think that the Amish necessarily reject modern medicine, actually. I'm trying to think if I've seen a couple in the hospitals in Baltimore. But the Jehovah's Witnesses do, but I'm not sure that the Amish do. It's a good question. It's a lifestyle that is, of course, completely separated from this modern economy that we have, right? They are not plugged in. They might know what they refer to us as. They call us the English. I don't know why, because we speak English. Filthy capitalists. Those English, they all speak German, by the way. I think we skipped over that point. They actually speak an antiquated German that's like 3 centuries old. My father speaks German. When he goes and talks to them, doesn't understand a word they say. They also don't wear deodorant. I just find that important. In the summer, they wear their long clothes. Yes, they don't smell great. But who do they got to impress? They're working the land. Their spouse doesn't wear a deodorant either. They're betrothed. You guys are funny. So they're, but it's a very difficult proposition to live that way. But they, the Amish are some model of a sustainable community. There are other options. Kimmerer points the way to a different kind of sustainable community that might be more appealing. I imagine it is. But let me dwell on something else here. They practice polyculture. Hang on. Here's what Elvis says. Yeah, homosexual behavior is sin. It's true. They are very traditional and highly patriarchal as well. And the kids, yeah. Anyway, I don't want to get caught up on that. Let's get back onto sustainability while I have you for a few more minutes. You know, but their virtue from Kimmerer's point of view is that they practice polyculture, and the vast majority of, well, all industrial farmers do not. All industrial farmers practice monoculture. The virtue of polyculture is that you are independent, right? You grow certain crops for sale and you grow enough for your own food. The other farmers up in Pennsylvania, the industrial farmers, once upon a time, they had vegetable gardens. Now they grow nothing but corn. And guess what? You can't live on corn. Corn is yummy, but you will get diabetes after a while if you eat nothing but corn. The other major crop is soy, right? And as I was explaining to you last week, these are the two building blocks of our modern food culture, our fast food culture, our preserved food culture. Dwelling further on the monoculture of our food system, you know, so agriculturally speaking, we practice monoculture. Michael Pollan points out that this reflects in our food system in that we eat, you know, there is a kind of poverty in our foods as well. There's a gross lack of diversity in what we're eating. And for Kimmerer, that translates into a serious thoughtlessness that goes into what we eat and how we eat. And I would argue that's a big problem for many of the health crises we suffer in this country. We discussed this last week, right? We have a health crisis. For the first time in American history, the first time in the industrialized world, we are the first country to ever go backwards in terms of life expectancy. Diabetes crisis, hypertension, high blood pressure, heart disease, obesity. These markers are going through the roof. This has to do with our food culture, which is reflected in our agriculture. Here's something I'm not sure if you all know. I'm going to share with you this, this thing I found here about corn. I don't know if you all can see this. Oh, it doesn't look so great. I'll share it with you. I'll post it on here. Corn, everybody, which is our most subsidized product, agricultural product. Guess what? It shows up everywhere. You see it in across our industrial system. You see it in foods, of course, but not only foods. You see it in oil. Look at this. You see it in gas. You see it in pharmaceuticals. You see it in glue. You see it in batteries. Okay. So here's a list. You know, I'm going to share this with you. I'll post it on our Canvas site, but I'm having a hard time reading this. I don't know how I can zoom this out, but you know, basically, if you were to turn over a bag of Cheetos, and you will see invariably a host of ingredients that you have no idea what they are, you will find out that most of them are extracts from corn. Basically, food scientists in Iowa and the Midwest, they discovered a few years ago that they could break down corn into various product parts, salts and sugars and fats, and then they just mix and match them throughout our food system. But here's the point. Corn shows up everywhere now. It shows up in, I believe there's even plastic now that they make from corn. And it shows up in, there is an ingredient in our batteries that comes from corn, and there is fuel that comes from corn. Do you guys know what that fuel is? And when I say fuel, I mean fuel for your car, bro. You ever filled up your car and looked on the gas pump? It says 10% ethanol. Ethanol? You guys know ethanol? Ethanol is a fuel that comes from plants, okay? When it was first really touted about 10 years ago, Oh, Max, so sorry. Type 2 diabetes. Yes, thank you. That's the crisis that is really blowing up here. Which is basically, I'm just to be clear, I'm talking about the diabetes that is induced by diet. I don't mean that is genetic, that if you're genetically disposed. Here's the crazy thing about ethanol, everybody. About 10, 15 years ago, there was a big push among environmentalists that said, listen, if we're going to wean ourselves off petroleum, why not introduce more fuel from plants? Basically, ethanol is alcohol, and alcohol can be made from any plant at all. And so, you can get some really sustainable fuels from plants. But guess what, everybody? Corn is the least efficient of them all. Okay, but why do we do it? Because we have a fuckload of corn. That's why we do it. Now, the country of Brazil, Brazil is one of the biggest consumers of ethanol in the world. They make their ethanol from the remains of sugarcane. They grow sugarcane, they process sugar, and then the chaff that's left over, they squeeze it. The liquids they ferment, they get ethanol from it. That's a very high grade ethanol. It's a very efficient ethanol. Corn ethanol is the worst. And in particular, corn ethanol is very bad because it clogs up the fuel injection system of your car and it makes your car less fuel efficient. That doesn't seem to matter in Washington. Because we have so much corn, we have got to use it. What are we going to do with it all? We are going to put it in our gas, we'll put it in our batteries, we'll put it in our Cheetos, et cetera, et cetera. So, our agricultural practices, our farm subsidies, this has led to a perverse system where we, we're happy to consume, we're eager consumers, but we're also urged to consume more and more and more, okay? And, we'll talk about this more next week, but really the task is, and the big question is, how can we escape from that cycle of consumerism? Cheap goods, big appetites. The Amish have, love them or hate them, they have completely excised themselves from that cycle, right? And that's what Kimmerer is talking about. That's the goal, to be excised from that cycle. Sorry. I have been blabbering. Anybody have any questions or comments? I could talk about food all day. I love talking about food. Anybody have any questions? Or comments? No, sir. Don't call me sir. Let's talk about, let's dive a little deeper into Kimmerer. We only have a few more minutes. We've been kind of dealing with her. Thank you. We've been kind of dealing with her stuff, in a broader level. But let's dive in a little bit. Well, let me take my prompt from you all and see what parts of Kimmerer did you really appreciate, if you appreciate them, or maybe there are parts you didn't like, but I don't know. What parts of this book really stuck with you?
I really liked her definition of what a gift is. Like what defines a gift versus just something that you get. Like the fact that a gift requires a mutual relationship.
Yeah. She talks about the difference between gift and commodity. Yeah. And she talks about a gift economy. That was really nice. What's the difference between a gift and a commodity?
like I just said, like a gift is, it requires a mutual relationship. It like forms a bond between two people, while a commodity, there's no like tie, you have no tie to the person that you are getting this thing from. Like you give them money, you take it, you say thanks, and then you leave, and you don't like have any other ties besides that. And like the example she gave of like, if her grandmother like knitted her a pair of socks, she's going to go out of her way to show her appreciation for that, write a thank you note, like make something for her in return, like that sort of thing. That's what a gift is to her, because it makes a relationship between two people.
Right. And she says she's not going to write a letter to J.C. Penney thanking them for the socks that she buys, right? One of the most interesting points that she made in that essay that I thought was so interesting was she says that gift versus commodity, this has a profound difference. This has a profound impact on how we consume. What is the difference? Viewing something as a gift as opposed to viewing it as a commodity. What is the difference in how that impacts us to, inspires us to consume? Anybody remember what she says about that?
I remember she said how she went to a market and that she went to a gift-based market, and that had everything just been extremely cheap, she would have bought in excess, but because everything was free and everything was a gift, she decided to get only what she needs.
Good. So a gift economy inherently diminishes consumption. A commodity economy accelerates consumption. Or to put it differently, when you view things as a commodity, you're more likely to consume more of them. Yeah. Yeah, she gives the example of visiting that market in the Andes. And, you know, she was gifted vegetables by the vendors, and she felt like she had enough, you know, as opposed to if she had to buy them. And if they were cheap, just think about it. Have you ever been like in an experience where you're in a store and you see, I found myself in a dollar store a little while ago, and I found, I think I saw like cans of tuna for like $1. I loaded up, you know, more than I need. I brought them home. My wife yelled at me, you know, like I got in trouble. Like, what was I doing? You know, hoarding tuna. I mean, I'm a despicable person, you know. But I like that argument. When we view things as commodity, we're more inclined to load up. And when it's cheap, we load up even more, right? I call that, in my own little world, I call that the Costco effect. Y'all know Costco? Costco is an amazing place. I have mixed feelings. I mean, their 6,000 calorie pizza is pretty tasty, but, you know, it's a little over the top. My family members who go to Costco, they invariably get a second fridge. You know, you'll open a closet, paper towels, you know, to the ceiling. There's something about the Costco. Oh, Felix. Oh, you are in for a treat. When you get to Baltimore, I know of two. They're the opposite of the Amish market. Kendall will take you to the Amish market. Elva will take you to Costco. We have all our field trips planned. And it's just, you know, it's you go to my family, my parents and my in-laws are immigrants, and they just love the Costco. They just dig it, you know. Costco is just a warehouse. It's no frills. You walk in, and when you buy things at Costco, you're not buying anything like modest. You want a granola bar? You're out of luck. You got to buy 1,500, or well, I'm exaggerating. You got to buy a box. You know what I mean? Like 50 in there. You can't buy a single chicken there. You got to buy at least, they come in packs of 2, right? They moved from BJ's. You know, I went.
Sam's Club.
Hmm?
It's like Sam's Club.
It is exactly like Sam's Club.
Okay.
I only know Costco because that's where my family goes, but it's, this is an American phenomenon, right? I mean, this is buying things in bulk. And what's crazy is where this has really caught on, right? It used to be you only bought in bulk if you had like 6 kids, if you were a wannabe Amish. Now, everybody goes to Costco. And that means you have gobs and gobs of stuff piling up in your closets, in your refrigerators and whatnot. I mean, hey, everybody, talk about carbon effect or the carbon footprint. There have been many studies done that about, the appliances in our home. So many homes today have 2 refrigerators and a freezer. In the 1970s, you typically had only 1 refrigerator per house, right? And so there is greater electrical use in our houses as well. And so therefore the carbon footprint has expanded again. Consumption, has a growing carbon footprint in general. So the big question that we'll be discussing next week is like, how do we track this? How do we pull this back? Ash is mentioning freezers. I've been in a long-term fight with my wife about a freezer, right? So I have a vegetable garden. I want a freezer so I can freeze stuff because I'm too lazy to can. And she won't get the freezer. And she won't get the freezer because she's completely right. She says to me, we get a freezer, you're just going to pile in the food there and it'll pile up and it'll just sit there. And then it'll get freezer burn and it'll go to waste. My wife is much more sensible than I am. She wants to she's a little bit like Kimmerer. She eats what we have, right? She's big on that. Little fanatical sometimes, but she wants to eat what we have. Ooh, kimchi freezer. I could get into that actually. But kimchi is pickled. I'm confused. Any case, Costco. James, I think you meant to say that Walmart is a racket. Is that what you meant to say? You didn't mean to say ratchet, did you?
No, Walmart's ratchet.
You meant to say ratchet?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, what does that mean? I don't know what that means.
It's just like I hate being at Walmart, especially like where I'm at right now. It's too messy, and like the people there are like.
I mean, look, you don't gotta beat around the bush. You can say it. Walmart's ghetto, okay?
Yeah.
Walmart is ghetto.
Walmart's full of scary white people. It's legitimately terrifying. Like Long Island is full of scary white people as it is, but like you go into a Walmart and it's full of the people who are like so incredibly over spray tanned with like the bleach blonde hair, and you feel like you're gonna get like screamed at. It's scary.
I feel like ghetto and ratchet have like different vibes.
I've never heard of ratchet before. Thank you, James. Thank you, James. Thank you for teaching me ratchet. I know. What do they call Target Target around here, right? Because it's a little bit upscale, right? I mean, Walmart, I know we're out of time, so I'll tie this together. Walmart is at the forefront of globalization. It's at the forefront of this, disposable commodity culture. Get yourself some shirts that are $4. Who gives a shit how long you hang on to them, right? One of the most remarkable stories I ever read about the effects of globalization, which kind of captures it all, is a study done on Goodwill. You guys know Goodwill? Goodwill Industries, they have the thrift shops around. And I've noticed this lately, like if, I'll bring this stuff to Goodwill and I'll bring it around the back and my God, like where there's the what do they call that? The donation center, you go around the back. I don't know if you guys have been to Goodwill lately to give a donation.
I have.
Kind of a jungle back there. Like you walk in, there's like stuff everywhere. And I'm like, oh my God, I remember as a kid bringing it to the donation center, they'd say, oh, thank you very much. And here's your receipt. Would you like a receipt? Blah, blah. Now they're like, drop that shit. We don't care if it sits and gets destroyed. The short of it is they have so much stuff. So much stuff. So the story I was thinking of about Goodwill is that in the late globalization and Walmart, which is the engine of globalization, really kick off in the 1990s. In a matter of about 10 years, donations to Goodwill went up 75%. I should specify they were clothes donations. If we have any budding fiber majors here, you know what I'm talking about. We're talking about disposable fashion. It emerged overnight. Shirts were throwaway commodities. You could load up on them. You could ignore them. You could burn them. You could throw them away. Just load up on more, right? We also fed that, right? The American consumers fed that. We fed that engine. We rewarded Walmart for these deals. I starkly remember this story. I think I was right out of college, early 90s. Walmart had just moved into our part of Maryland. And my uncle came to a cookout and he was wearing a shirt and everybody's like, hey, that's a pretty nice shirt. Where'd you get it? He said, I got it at Walmart, $10. And everybody's like, wow, that's pretty good. And I remember at the time, because I was already kind of like a left-wing asshole, at the time I thought in my head, why is that $10? And we know, right? Why is it $10? Hello? What's the secret to Walmart's success? Yeah, there you go.
Underpaid workers.
In parts of the world where wages are very low. And this is the story of, this sums up the American consumer. We are happy for the cheap prices, and we never ask, ever, why is it so goddamn cheap? There's an ad recently about Burger King Whoppers, like 2 for $4.50, you know? Our first thought should be, why the hell is that so cheap? What is going on here that is so cheap? Instead, we are happy. We almost treat this as if this was an expectation, and we are happy to gorge. And indeed, it is the cheap ingredients. It is cheap labor. It is the unaccounted cost of the environmental effect. There's a host of reasons this is cheap, and we are very unthinking consumers, very unthinking. And I really like, my favorite part of the Kimmerer book, and I will leave it here now for next week, is when she is walking down the aisles, she goes to the mall, and she tries to think about, really think critically about the paper she's buying and the pens she's buying. And, where do these come from? How are they harvested? How were they produced? How can I be a conscientious and moral consumer and buy things so that I have a minimal impact? We rarely do that. But I'll tie this back to what we were saying earlier about, the tomatoes from your own garden. I think she's right. There is a kind of joy that comes with mindful consumption. For one thing, you consume less, and we could all do more of that. That's very helpful, not only in physical ways, but I think in emotional, psychological ways. Consumption wastes the soul. Consumption is anxiety inducing. A variety of ills. But mindful consumption, that I think that's what she's talking about. And this has to do with how we interact with our environment, how we view our environment, how we live with our environment. And it has to do with this larger theme, which I didn't really get into, which I want to take up next week, which is how to become indigenous. That was the theme of the last essay I had you all read, and I find that very powerful, that discussion. She argues, and this is very powerful coming from her as a Native American, she argues the problem with these Europeans, they never became indigenous to this continent, but you can become indigenous. And that is a related discussion as well. How we consume, how we live, how we interact with our environment. This is deeply related to how we become indigenous to a place. And so far, Americans do a very poor job of this. And I would point out that the American model of, I know we have some international students in this class. Why is this of interest to you? Because the American model of consumption and capitalism and commodity production is a very powerful and tempting export model. Countries around the world, when they move into the middle class, when they have a growing middle class, they tend to pick up American habits of consumption. Fast food enterprises, the fast food model is exported. Meat consumption rises exponentially. Think about it. Our American brands are the biggest, most infectious brands on the planet. They sell all over the world. You find McDonald's all over the world, Coca-Cola. And Hollywood, we're busy selling an American lifestyle across the planet. So the way we live, we really need to prosecute and analyze the way that we live and the way we consume, because this is hugely impactful for the rest of the planet. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there for today. Setting the stage for what we're going to discuss next week. I want us to think hard about, I want to take up a discussion about what it means to become indigenous to a place. I want to talk about, American mobility. And this model, I think, is becoming, infectious across the globe as well. Our suburban middle class consumer habits. I want to talk about what it means to become indigenous to a place. And I want to talk about, if you guys have any practical ideas for how we can consume less, maybe even personal experiences about how we or you or I can consume less and do consume less, and why that's important. Okay. And you have those short stories to read for next week, and we will take them up as well, okay? And then next week you will have no writing due next week, no reading responses, but you will be finishing up your final papers. So if you have any questions about your edits, please let me know, all right? Okay, everybody. I hope you can, starting at 2 next week. Thank you, Felix, yes. And I'm supposed to be on the radio at noon. I was just told it might be bumped because of the Supreme Court hearings, but if it is, I'll send you the link. You can listen in if you want. Try and get some apple picking in if you can. I would highly recommend it. And if you make yourself a nice apple pie, be sure to share the recipe, okay? All right, I'm gonna stick around if anybody wants to chat. Have a great week, everybody, okay? Take care of yourselves. Bye.
Bye.
Vince? Vince? Hello?